You so much. I will try to talk slow. If I speed up, please tell me to slow down. So my name is Elandria Williams. I'm going to share my screen right quick. And I'm sorry that the slides are not translated. I should have done that. It's my fault. Um, so my name is Elandria Williams. And I said I am currently the executive director of an organization called People's Hub, which is about sharing stories, helping people think about strategy and where we have to go for the future. It's global in nature. And a lot of that is because I came out of doing work and my family was really active in the civil rights movement, the Black Power movement, and then in movements before that. And so I come from people who ran away from slavery, started Black towns, and really we're like, how do we take care of what we need? How do we like do what we have to do for existence? How do we craft our own realities, our own futures, and not just fight back, but actually craft what we need? And so that's who I come from. And I'm grateful for that because a lot of people in the United States don't. A lot of people come from cities. I come from the country. And so it means that everything that we do is connected. So I'm going to talk about environmental things, but I'm also going to talk about how everything is interconnected because where I live, there's no option. Um, and so I was asked around what does racism look like in your context? And everything in my context is racialized. There is nothing in the United States that is not racialized or has racial indicators or control. But some things that I wanted to really, lift up around what's happening right now. And then I'm gonna get to some ponderings because I think there's some big questions that we have to ask for our movement. And so all these pictures are things that I've either are part of or connected to. Um, and so I um mm. So how racism really looks in the United States is it looks everything from like it does in your like it does in every other country, right? That's got racialization and colonialism and it's had capitalism and all the things that we're all dealing with, right? So it's personal, it's institutional, and it's cultural, right? It's embedded in the hegemony and the culture of our place. And it's embedded in how we make decisions, how we move, who matters and who does not. And so these are some pictures that represent how racism plays out in my life, right? So it plays out in everything from like on the left, on the top is a place called the Highlander Center, where I used to work, and has been connected to forever. It's almost 80, almost 90 years old now. And it's a civil rights institution, right? And it's a land-based place for people to gather and share. So how racism plays out in the United States is the places and the sites where we can actually gather, where we can strategize, and we can move our firebombs, right? And there are neo-Nazi signs put on them. And the neo-Nazis are like 4 blocks away. They're like very close to you. They're not way down the street. They're not people you don't know. They're like right there in front of your face. And so this is the building in which I used to work. And the only couple pieces of paper that have come out are belong to me, which is an intense thing. Um, and then it plays out both in how things are burned in terms of those sites and in churches. So next is the church that I attend in Knoxville, where a man came in and shot 15 people, and 2 died. Right. So and this happened within a couple years of each other. So that's the other way it plays out, right? And that's that's always how it's played out by people coming in and really like pushing attacks. So that's like the more when people think of like violence, right? We're either going to firebomb your building, we're going to do a digital attack on you, which is what's happened to me online. We're going to come in and shoot up your churches, your mosques, your temples. But it also happens, right, by like, so on the right side is a town called Uniontown in Alabama. It is an all Black town and it's the coal ash spill, right? So the other way it plays out is like companies and like Tennessee Valley Authority and others, like they inspect certain places and don't inspect others. So this is the largest coal ash spill that has happened in the United States. It happened in a rural town, maybe an hour from me. And everybody is still fighting and organizing, but there have been coal ash spills and fracking and natural gas and all of the things that we are fighting against, toxic waste dumping, are happening, and especially in Black and Indigenous places all over the United States. And a lot of those places are connected. So Uniontown, Alabama is here. Next on the left is the Caesar Rising, right? In the Gulf Coast and all of our places. And a lot of that is actually due, to, of course, to man-made things. right? And so, and a lot of the same places. So we're like, my family is, we're in Florida. So there's both like the seas are rising, there's like oil spills, and there's coal ash dumping, and people are doing paper mills and dumping toxic waste right where the schools are. So, right, all that is happening at the same time. And then the next picture on the right is, and so I'll talk about this more when you'll see a video. So when we were in Cleveland, and this is when the movement for Black Lives started. In this iteration, I think of it as being very old. I started doing work around police brutality when I was like 12, and I'm now 41. So I think people like to act like things are like brand new, but to me, they're like the continuation of the work that has been done forever, and the work that my parents and grandparents did, and the work that their families did before that, trying to stop slave catchers, right? So it's like the long line of continuation. Um, and so, and then the next picture is around Corona. And I feel like how the thing to me that I think is important to say about the coronavirus and the multiple pandemics we're in right now is that there's always been this history of Black people being experimented on in the United States, right? Whether it's the syphilis experiment, whether it's taking your cells. And so much of the things around health really are about like how we can use you as a guinea pig. And so right now they're trying to test like the antidote and trying to test other things, right, on Black people in Detroit and in Gary, Indiana, and other places. And so that's another way racism plays out. It's like your very body you cannot own. And I think that's been the huge part. Is like, what does it mean to own our bodies? What does it mean to own our minds? What does it mean to own our cultures? What does it mean to have collective ownership over like the ways we move in the world and not still be currency, right? Because that's the point of slavery. It's like you were currency, you were somebody's insurance, you are not worthy of anything that you don't produce. And so much of the work that's being done right now is actually like taking away from us as productive, as only productive people. And like we actually have right to be outside of our production. We have right to be outside of like what you can take from us. And the so where I work at People's Hub, a lot of the things we think about are about like what does it mean for us to do resistance as rootedness? What does resilience look like? Restoration and reimagination, right? And then what's the reparations that are necessary to make all this happen? But reparations in terms of restoring and like really reimagining what that looks like outside of like land. But like, what does that mean in a 7-generation context? What does that mean in terms of language, culture, when so much we have is gone? And so, trying to think if I want to. So these are some of the examples, but I want to actually show a video first, if that's possible, because I think it explains who we are. So I hope people could people see the video?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I wanted to show the video because the video is so this man in the middle who had his pepper spray when we started the movement for Black Lives and we had a convention and we had gathered all these people together and it was the first time that we were able to bring together all the mothers, all the families who had lost people to police violence. And so I was helping run this thing, and I was the safety person managing the police. And and so we were getting phone calls from like moms all over the country. Like there's 250 of us. We're on our way in right now. Like we're coming. So I hope you're ready. And this man right here, who there's people in your life that remind you of people. And so I told my mom he reminded me of this guy named Bull Connor who came after her when she was young and doing wait-ins in Florida and whipping her on her back. And so this man was so like the violence was just like oozing from him. And so he had pepper sprayed everybody. And then it was my job to have him stop. And so we ended up having the gathering of people, and he had arrested this 14-year-old boy. And so, one way I think that we understand resistance as rootedness is like, what does it mean to come together to stop things, right? So, instead of people being arrested, what do we have to do to actually stop their arrest? And so, like, that was my job, was to stop his arrest. And it also meant that I ended up on the news, and my mom and family are freaking out because they're like, why are you standing up against this really tall white dude? What is happening? And so I feel like that, so that's like an example to me of what it means for people to gather and have alternate responses. The other things I'll just mention in my short little time left um, is we're really thinking around disability justice and COVID, and what it means as Black people to really, a lot of us have disabilities. And a lot of us have disabilities due to environmental racism. So I have really bad asthma and allergies and lupus, but a lot of it is due to drinking natural gas and due to being shot at and grenades and due to being like really impacted by all the things that are infecting us in terms of toxic waste dumping, in terms of pollution. And so that's actually what has exacerbated my asthma and has made it hard for me to do almost anything at this point. And so the way that, of course, health plays out is important. And so we're like doing everything from like movement organizing to the people up in the yellow, and this called Fertile Ground. They're a women's led food cooperative. They've also gotten some land to really start growing food and to think about how do we do things differently. On the right is some Somali refugees because immigration is a major issue in the United States. And so we're trying to think about like, how do we shift what's happening around migration and deportations in the United States as it relates to Black people? And so help start a thing called the Black Alliance for Just Immigration. And are really like, how do we actually learn from Black like folks that are coming to this country? How do we learn new ways of growing and being and like taking care of each other? And as a friend of mine says, how do we learn to re-village? How do we really relearn to really be in community in different ways? And then the last thing on this slide is a thing called the Caesar Rising, and so are we, from Gulf South Rising. And it's a group of people that are organizing around ending what's happening in terms of things on the Gulf Coast. And I'm trying to make sure. Okay. So one last slide. And so the movement, so I've been really involved in the movement for Black Lives since it's begun, and the policy table and other things. And so we've got like there's some key different policy zones that also relate to practices. So ending the war on Black people, reparations, divesting and investing, economic justice, and liberation, community control, and political power. And so all those are, of course, are interconnected. And we're really like, if we're going to have a response around what's happening around environmental justice and environmental racism, what do we need to do, right? What do we do that's holistic, that understands all of it, and that allows people to move from a consumerist mindset to a like creation one, right? Like, what does it mean to move from that way? Because that's part of the challenge, is we're not always there yet. And we're having a National Black Convention in August, which would be beautiful. There hasn't been a Black convention in a long time. And so it'll be one of the first times that this happens in a while. And it's like pretty mainstream. And I feel like that's the moment we're in right now, is that we have moved from, a time where some of us were out there in the street to a time where we're more like in your countries, where like everybody is connected. It hasn't been like this in years. So people in my life, that my cousins and family and friends that normally do nothing but sit on the couch, are like, I'm out in the streets. And so like an example is a friend of mine is in, so right now Portland, Oregon, which is like one of the widest places in the universe, is under siege by the federal government. And they've used Homeland Security, which is who does ICE, our deportations and immigration, to really go in and attack everybody there. And they're using private contractors that they're also using in other countries, especially in Nigeria and Somalia. So it's a really intense, like how things like intersect, right? Globally and in the United States, around how we are shifting and what control looks like. And so folks are getting shot in the head every day, and they're getting pushed and they're getting killed. And for some people, it's the first time they've actually had to deal with repercussions of like a rally, right? Whereas other people in other countries, it's like their norm. For a lot of people in the United States, it's not. And so the thing I would also mention is on the right. So again, around the world we want, I'm involved in a project called Beautiful Solutions that's actually global. And we're looking at what are examples of what people are doing all around the world in terms of governance, housing, land, food, because so much of what we've done has been focused on resistance, and not around how do we craft, right? And so we're really learning from these amazing Black women in the 30s and the 40s in the United States that did the organizing work, but they also organized around like how do we build foster care centers? How do we build community schools? How do we build like community housing? How do we actually make the way, and not just complain about the way? And so I think that's kind of where we're at right now is that, yes, we have to be in the streets. Yes, we have to stand against what's happening. And we also have to say, if we want clean water, how do we actually get there? Because the government's not going to do that, right? We're going to have to do that. And we can try to take over the government as much as we want, but we're like ever more reaching to a fascist state. And so these are all in English, and I am really sorry. I will get them translated and sent back out. But I just wanted to leave with some big questions and ponderings, that I feel like a lot of us are trying to figure out right now. So one is like, what does it mean to define community? So in the United States, we are very hyper individualist, and unless you come from a small place. And so when people think about community transformation, they're like, my community is of 15 artists I'm connected with, not my community is the town that I come from. And so because people don't think of their community in larger spaces, you can't do community transformation if you're thinking about community with the 18 people you like the most, right? And so we're really shifting around like, what does that mean to do full scale community transformation? How do we do cultural shifts that are connected to art, culture, and spirit? Because so many of the things that we have to deal with are cultural in nature. Hybrid space, which is around, some of it's around disability justice, but like everything can't be one size fits all. How do we really think about leverage versus power? Because a lot of times we talk about power, but we actually mean leverage. We don't actually mean we want to annihilate everybody around us. What we actually mean is we want to have leverage over the things that impact our lives. And that power is neutral. Power can be both beautiful and it can be really dangerous. That we have to develop trust and communities of trust. So we're trying to do a lot of work around abolition and ending the police state, but you actually have to trust your neighbor if you're going to do that, right? And so we don't have a lot of communities of trust because people are moving all the time. And so how do you develop that along with community care? And then the last ones are around like worthiness. We're doing a lot of work around what does it mean for people to believe that they're worthy? Because if you don't believe you're worthy, you're not going to stand and fight for what you believe in. You're going to let anything take you over. And if we can't like really deal with like us as Black people, us as Black women, us as people are worthy, then we're not going to make it. And so that's so much of the work, because in the US, so many times people are told that they're unworthy all day long. And so to actually like have a thing that tells you you are worthy is actually super crucial. Spiritual and movement fortification. What does it mean to be innovative and entrepreneurial without destroying other people? Radical accompaniment, because it's hard to like craft things if you don't have people to support you. And then there's a whole bunch of stuff around what resources are needed for us to actually make these shifts. And so I would just say, thank you for letting me talk to you today. And there's so much that to say and so much work to do. But okay, thank you.